Alrighty, guys. So we are about 22 hours away from the first test starting between India and Australia in Nagpur, and I just thought I'd throw together a little preview, give some thoughts, some predictions, what I think the teams will look like, and talk about some of the other stuff that might be going down in this first test match in Nagpur. I'm really excited for this series. I think that goes without saying. Everyone in the cricketing community, I'd say, is pretty hyped for this series. It's between the best two teams in the world. There's no doubt about that. England are looking really good, but they haven't really had a major test yet. So I would still say it's between the two best teams in the world, and probably the two teams that will likely play each other in the World Test Championship final. The teams are both in really good form. Australia coming off dominant series wins against the Windies and the Saffers in the home summer. And India just had a pretty successful tour of Bangladesh. They were a little bit wobbly in one of the tests there, but they've still looked really good leading up to this series. They obviously had a few T20 and ODI wins against New Zealand as well, which has put some of their players in actually really good form heading into the series. So, yeah. Now, the biggest talking point that's come out the day before the test match is the pitch. And, usually when you go to India, a lot of the talk is about the pitches and what they toss up for touring sides. And a lot of the time they're called unfair, unsporting, whatever. I always think that discussion, personally, is a bit poor because every team does it in the world. England, when you go to England, you're playing on seaming wickets. When you go to Australia, it's really bouncy decks. If you go to India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, generally it spins a lot. So I never really had an issue with any of that per se. However, the treatment of the pitch is looking really, really dodgy this time around. So there was a tweet by Australian journalist Bharat Sundaresan, and I'm not great at pronouncing his name, so ignore that. And he said that this is what he said. He said, interesting treatment of the pitch in Nagpur. The ground staff have watered the entire centre of the surface and only the length areas outside the left-hander's leg stump, and then rolled only the centre, stopping short every time they got to the good length areas at both ends. Hashtag India vs Oz. So that raises some interesting questions, and it comes with some pretty damning images of the wicket, and I'll put them on screen now, but you can clearly see that the two spots outside off stump for the left-hander are much, much drier than the rest of the wicket, which seems to indicate that the wicket has been prepared in a way that it will play less favourably for left-handers. Now, obviously, India's top five, if we assume what their top five is going to be, has all right-handers, whereas Australia is a majority of a left-handed team, I'd say. Like, Smith and Marnus are probably Australia's two best batsmen, but then from there you've got Warner, Khawaja, potentially Renshaw, Carey, Head, who are all lefties, and it does not look great from an Indian perspective if the intention was to create a wicket that was unfair in this regard. And who was it? Crash Craddock made the argument earlier today that people often say, well, both teams have to play on the pitch, and whoever just plays on the pitch better, should deserve to get the win. However, when it comes to this situation, that's very different because there's obviously a very clear distinction between a left-hander playing on the pitch and a right-hander playing on the pitch. So it's a real interesting one, and I guess we'll be able to see that when we watch the test match tomorrow, how much that actually plays a difference. But honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if the ICC steps in and says, guys, what's going on with the wicket? Why does it look like this? Why haven't you been rolling it properly? But I guess we'll find out tomorrow. It's going to be an important toss to win as well. If the team that wins the toss has to bat first and score big runs on that wicket, because I would not be surprised if it goes pretty downhill quick on that wicket. Alrighty, let's talk about Australia. So Australia arrived in India about a week ago, I would say. They've been in the country for a little bit. There were some visa issues with Khawaja, but they've all been there. A lot's been made of their preparation. They didn't go to India early like they usually do and play a couple tour games, or they didn't go to Dubai and train in the facility like they did in 2017. This time they opted to stay in Australia for pretty much as long as they possibly could, training at North Sydney. And, they prepared a wicket out there to kind of simulate Indian conditions, although at the end of the day, it's still only North Sydney Oval, so it's not exactly Mumbai. But Yeah, so Australia's preparation, by all accounts, it's been going fairly well, apart from the injuries. So Stark and Hazelwood have already been ruled out of the first test, and Cameron Green is highly unlikely to play with his his finger injury. So yeah, Green is likely out, and that is a massive loss for Australia. I think that from the Australian public, we don't really appreciate Cameron Green as much as we should because of his lack of test hundreds. But he offers so much balance to our team. He's a very, very good batsman. He's going to be a great of Australian cricket. And his bowling supplements our attack so well. It gives, Hazelwood, Stark, Boland, Cummins, whoever it is, more opportunities to rest, and he can just come in, bowl 4 overs. And often he gets wicket. Like he got 5 wickets in the Boxing Day test this year, so he is a massive loss. And then you have Stark, who's probably been our best reverse swing bowler in the last few years. And often when we've gone over to these subcontinent conditions, Stark has been one of our best players just because of his raw pace and his ability to reverse swing the ball. He often gets a lot of wickets. Like there was the tour of Sri Lanka in 2016 where he got the most wickets and outshone all our spinners, including Nathan Lyon, and got the most wickets in the series. But yeah, he is a massive, massive loss, and he's been in incredible form in Australia. It really seems like he's, really put his mind towards test cricket. And it's funny because his white ball cricket has decreased slightly, but his test cricket's just getting better and better and better. So he's out. Losing Hazelwood's another big one. I don't know if they would have went with Hazelwood for the first test, given that Cummins and Stark were probably the 2 first choice pacers. But Hazelwood still is a massive loss if they did want to go with an extra quick. But even as a reserve quick, I would have assumed he would have played with Cummins maybe actually if, he didn't get injured. But yeah, he's a big loss. He's another one that can get the ball to go reverse, and he just bowls in that channel all day long. So he's another big loss. So let's talk about what Australia can potentially do to plug these holes. Cameron Green is going to be incredibly tough to replace, and I think we're going to really miss him in this test match, as we probably did in the last test of the summer against South Africa and Sydney. We really struggled with our bowling a little bit on that last day without Cameron Green being able to come in and bowl some quality overs. And given that I would predict we're going to be bowling some bulk overs in Nagpur, he's going to be a massive loss. So really, there's not really another all-round option like Green. I mean, there's Ashton Agar, but he's more of a spin bowling option. And if he plays, he'd obviously take the spinner spot down the order. So it's really between Peter Hanscom and Matthew Renshaw. So what do each bring? So Matt Renshaw, he is very experienced in Indian conditions. The last time he came out here, he played all 4 tests and he did reasonably well. I think he got the most runs aside from Smith in that series for Australia. So he had a really, really good tour. He's a left-hander, so obviously he's gonna, have to fare with that Ashwin coming around the wicket and, the supposed dangers of the wicket for left-handers. He'd have to deal with that. But he is the incumbent. He was the guy that batted 6 in the summer. So maybe he's the obvious choice, but I'm not so sure there. Peter Hanscom is someone who has really been banging down the door of getting back in the test team for a while, but there's been this sort of fear with the Australian team because the selectors, I should say, about bringing him back in because of how strange his technique is and how, on the outside it looks really susceptible to swing bowling in particular. But this is India, and we have to pick our best team for the conditions, and Pete Hanscom is a fantastic player of spin. He gets to the way he gets down the wicket, the way he gets back in his crease. He's just got a really great cricketing mind, and he's, very, very good in Indian conditions as well. I don't think he was quite as good as Renshaw in 2017, but he did have a really good series. So between those two, it's going to be a tough toss-up. I would probably lean towards Hanscom, but I would not be surprised if they go with Renshaw just because he is the one who is the reserve batter essentially for Australia at the moment. Now the 2 bowlers is going to be a little bit tougher because with Stark, I don't think Stark is actually replaceable in this team. Like he is that good in these conditions that we don't really have any bowler that's like him enough. Probably the closest thing is Lance Morris. Now, if it was purely up to me, I would be playing Lance Morris in the first test. he is, I think he's kind of branded, he's been branded by the Australian community as like this just brute fast bowler. Like, he's called the wild thing. He's like Sean Tate. He's going to be a bit all over the shop. But if you actually look at Lance Morris's highlights in the Shield, he gets a lot of his wickets with reverse swing and seam as opposed to just raw pace. He has his pace to fall back on, and he bowls 140 plus. But it's his reverse swing which has really been the thing that has got him heaps of wickets in the Shield. So if it was purely up to me, I'd play Lance Morris. However, how can you not pick Scott Boland after, his form in general? And honestly, he's more suited to seaming conditions, but he'll be very important to us in India, and he'll definitely get a test at some point, I would guess. If he can just bowl in that channel and just target the stumps, he's going to be so key for us, and he could pick up a lot of wickets. Then of course there's the question about the spinners. So obviously Nathan Lyon will play, but the question is the second spinner. Now, they played Agar in Sydney, which received a mixed response. I think everyone wanted Agar to play and get picked and succeed, but he just didn't bowl that well in Sydney, and that's partially because he's been playing nothing but white ball cricket for the last 12 months. So why would anyone expect him to go out there in a test match and go well? It's like they just chucked him the ball and said, yep, there you go, Ashton, get us some wickets. So I don't know what they really expect with that. So he's probably the incumbent option. But then there's the option of Todd Murphy, who the rumour is going around at the moment that Todd Murphy is going to play. Apparently his dad was at the airport and was going to fly over. I don't know if that's true. I just read that on Twitter somewhere, so it's probably not true. But yeah, Todd Murphy looks really good. He looks like the long-term spinner for Australia in Test match cricket. However, there's the question about, is playing two right-arm off-spinners a really great choice? Honestly, I think you pick the best two bowlers for the wicket, and if that's Todd Murphy and Nathan Lyon, then it's Todd Murphy and Nathan Lyon. And if you actually look at Todd Murphy's stats, he has better records. He is like one of the best records against right-handers in the country. So for a spinner, so it's like, does it have to be a left arm off spinner that plays like an Agar? Then there's obviously Swepson as well, but I just feel like Swepson's been really pushed to the back, which I think is a shame because, yeah, he struggled in Pakistan, but in that Sri Lanka series, he played actually really well and he looked really dangerous every time he had the ball. So I don't know, I think the obvious choice is Agar, but I would rather them pick Murphy. And the rumour is they're going to pick Murphy, but we'll see. The other addition to Agar as well is that he's a handy batsman as well, and we're going to need a lot of runs against this Indian team. The other potential option is to play Carey at 6. Which would then allow Australia to play an extra bowler, but I just don't think that's smart on this wicket. I think we're going to need all the batting we can get against bloody Ashwin and Patel and Jadeja, so I would personally go with the 6 batsmen and then Carey. With all that said, this is my 11 for the first test, so I've got Warner, Khawaja, Marnus, Smith. I think those 4 are pretty obvious at the moment. I've got Head at 5. I think Head deserves the first go. I'm not sure how he's going to go in Indian conditions, but he definitely deserves the first go. And maybe his new playstyle where he just attacks the bowlers could really be beneficial to us in Indian conditions. I've then got Hanscom 6. I just think he edges out Renshaw literally for being a right-hander. I think that's the main factor. Carey 7, Cummins 8. The bowlers. So the last 3 bowlers. So we got Cummins. I've got Lyon. I'm then going to go with Todd Murphy. I think you just have to pick your best 2 spinners. Like, we don't pick, you don't go, we're going to pick a right arm fast bowler and a left arm fast bowler because we need a left arm one. No, you pick your 2 best fast bowlers, and I think that should apply the same for spinners, and I think Todd Murphy is the second best spinner in the country at the moment. And for the last spot, I'm going to go with Scott Boland ahead of Lance Morris. But that's razor close, and if Boland struggles in the first test, maybe they'll bring in Lance Morris just for a bit of X factor. But yeah, that's my 11. I would expect Stark and potentially Hazelwood to come back into the team when fit, and definitely Green when fit. Of course, depending on how we go in the first test. On to India. Now, India's a bit of an interesting one because they've had a pretty quiet build-up. All in all, like, there hasn't been too much stuff around the team. It's fairly settled. Obviously, there's no Rishabh Pant, there's no Iyer, there's no Bumrah. Pant was never going to play after that horrible car crash. The the rumours about Bumrah had been going on for a while. Shreyas Iyer came out a bit of nowhere, but still, he is replaceable, in my opinion. He's a really good player, but I do think India have the stock to replace a player of his calibre at the moment. Of course, a lot of the discussions was around replacing Rishabh Pant and how would that look for India. Obviously, Sarfaraz Khan in the Ranji Trophy had been getting ridiculous runs. He averages like 70 or 80, I'm pretty sure. So the fact that he's not in the squad is very good from an Australian perspective. So instead, the discussion is between, do you go with Ishan Kishan or do you go with KS Bharat? So I don't know a heap about KS Bharat, I'll be honest, but judging by his stats, he looks like a very solid wicketkeeper. For Indian standards, he looks like a very good keeper. Neither of these two will replace Rishabh Pant, but it's about what type of keeper India wants to go with. Because then the other option is Ishan Kishan, who's probably not as clean a keeper as KS Bharat, but he's obviously a destructive white ball batsman, and if they want to go with someone a bit like for like with Rishabh Pant, then Ishan Kishan's the obvious option. Is his keeping up to scratch in long-term cricket? Is a bit of an unknown. So yeah, I'd probably lean towards India going with Bharat, but if they really do just want to build a really aggressive team, then Ishan Kishan might be the better option. And the funny thing with India now as well is that even though they've lost Bumrah, who's their premier fast bowler, that doesn't hurt them as much as it used to, because now they've got these great bowling stocks with, Shami, Yadav, Siraj. Between Siraj, Shami will play. Between Siraj and Yadav, I think they'll go with Siraj personally. Just seems to be a real competitor. I think he would put more fear into the Australian bowlers than what Umesh Yadav would. So I believe him to be the obvious choice for India there. So then it just comes down to who do you replace Shreyas Iyer for, and that's, like I said before, I don't think that's a difficult decision. They could go with someone like Sky, but I think that would have to be a really ballsy and risky move, to be honest. A man that, has I've checked his first class stats, he's got a pretty decent record, but I think the obvious choice is Shubman Gill. That kid is a bloody gun, and even at 5, which isn't probably his preferred position, it still makes India's team way better if he's in it, and it just adds more depth to the already strong batting lineup. Whereas Sky is a bit of you can't afford to take that risk just at this point in time, I don't think. Maybe if you were to lose the first test, potentially, but I would rather them go with Shubman Gill, in my opinion. So that leaves me with India's 11 for the first test. So I've gone with KL Rahul, Rohit Sharma, Pujara, Kohli. Much like Australia's top 4 picks themselves, pretty obvious, I'd say. Shubman Gill, I just think he has to play. If he's your reserve batter and you're not playing him when there's an injury, then there's something wrong. Going with KS Bharat, the bowlers, the 3 spinners, obviously, Jadeja, Ashwin, Axar Patel. There has been a bit of discussion about whether Axar should play over Kuldeep. That's crazy, in my opinion. Axar Patel is so dangerous. Kuldeep Yadav is a great bowler, and he might play a role later in the series. There was even rumours that they could go with 4 spinners and just play the 1 pacer. I wouldn't be surprised to see that, but I think what's more likely is they go with the standard Indian set up with their with their bowling attack, which is the 3 spinners, 2 pacers, and a couple all-rounders like in Jadeja and Ashwin who can both hold a bat, as well as Axar Patel. He's actually a good batsman as well. So Jadeja, Ashwin, Axar, and then I've gone Shami and Siraj. Again, just reiterating, Siraj just beats out Umesh Yadav for me on Indian wickets as well. So I guess that leaves me with my final predictions for the first test. I think it's going to be a really interesting test match, and honestly I think after the first day we will know a lot more about how this series is going to go. If Australia go out there, bat first and get rolled for 160, we know that Australia's going to really struggle in these conditions, obviously. But if Australia can go out there and put some fight to India and just let them know that, hey, we're here to play, we're in the fight, then this could be a really, really closely contested series. Overall, I think India will win the first test. Just a lot of that's playing in my mind is the pitch. If the pitch is like what the rumours are about the pitch, it will favour India heavily, massively. Ashwin to our lefties, he's just going to be so good. a lot of our lefties, they like to play inside the ball or outside the ball, play for spin. So that big front pad is going to be in trouble for guys like Travis Head, Carey, and even Warner and Kawaja. If they could open the bowling with Ashwin tomorrow, and I would not be surprised one bit. Axar Patel as well is a gun bowler, and he's probably the main threat to Smith and Marnus, who are our keys to victory, or the Australian keys to victory. So if Axar Patel plays, which he probably will, he will be very, very tough to face. And overall as well, India's batting is, I wouldn't say it's miles ahead of ours, but in Indian conditions, it's way bigger. Like, all 5 of those players are in pretty decent nick at the moment. Like, Rahul's in decent nick, Sharma's in good nick. Pujara always turns up against Australia. We know Kohli's obviously a gun, and Shubman Gill is probably in the form of his life at the moment. So that's my prediction. I think India gets it done in the first test, but we'll know more after the first day about how this test match and the series is going to play. So yeah, looking forward to it. It's going to be an awesome test match. It's going to be an awesome series. Let's see how it goes.